Welcome to Flex That Worx, a podcast for anyone building, managing, or growing a flexible workspace without making things more complicated than they need to be. If you're running a single co-working space, juggling multiple locations, or overseeing a growing network of spaces across towns or cities, this is your space. It's for the operators, the managers, decision makers, the people doing the work to make these places run. This is Flex That Worx, scaling your workspace made simpler and less stressful. See you in the episode. Welcome to the latest episode of Flex That Worx. My name is Anne-Marie Murphy and I am here with the CEO of Baseworks, my colleague Graham Clarke. Hi Graham.
Hi Anne-Marie, how are you doing?
Great. So today we're going to chat about events. Okay, so events can be one of the best ways to engage your members. But for a lot of co-working operators, they end up being actually a huge drain on time, on money, on energy. So you're hearing they're really important, but maybe you're not finding them the most efficient thing to run, and maybe you're not getting the results out of them that you're hearing other operators talk about. So we want to chat today about how you run events that people love without running yourself into the ground. So Graham, the problem with events. Let's start there. Why do so many co-working operators end up totally exhausted or overextended when it comes to running events, do you think?
I can speak from my own experience when I was running the space in Galway. As a community manager, space manager, whatever it may be, it's an accepted practice that events are a great way to promote the space. You know, it's a fantastic way of getting people in the door, building that familiarity, removing that, oh, I didn't realize that's what was here before, or I didn't realize that's what you did here. So what I found myself was that I was all about the number of events was my KPI. And what I found was I was trying to run as many events as possible. Quality dipped in a lot of instances. Not going to be too hard on myself because a lot was experimentation as well at the time to see what would work and what wouldn't work. But as I kind of settled into my role, I kind of learned how to say no to certain events, if that makes sense.
So people are nearly falling into the trap of kind of events for the event's sake almost.
Exactly. So I took the approach where I was coming up with ideas for events. I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to put that back on the members and say, well, look, if you want to have an event, it took some of the thinking time out of it for me, where people were coming to me with events. And it was great. I don't have to think about filling out my event calendar anymore. Somebody else is doing it, or my community is now doing that for me. I ran with that for a while, but what I found quite quickly was I'm staying back after work. It's 8:30 at night. Somebody's doing a wellness session, or I think at the time, maybe 5-6 years ago, there was a lot of people kind of getting into this life coaching thing. I end up with a lot of life coaches wanting to run sessions out of the space, which is great in theory. When you're there 3 hours after close of business and there's 4 people in a room and I had to be on site, I struggled to see the value of it for me, my employer, and the space overall, So there is a critical mass around measuring the success of an event.
And aligned events.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of spaces that we speak to, typically no two spaces are the same, but you can draw some similarities. And I think the space that you worked in was a community space in some ways. So you do have to be open to allowing the space to be used by up and coming business owners and things. But at the end of the day, you do have a core function there as well, and a core group of members, and it's okay to make sure that you've got a volume of events that are suited to those members rather than putting the community first, maybe. And I don't mean the co-working community. I mean local community.
Even that, then one of the things I realized as well was the shared effort. Here I was willing to stay behind, put a bit of budget into there, and then, they turn up and it's like, sorry, I think there might only be a handful coming because I've been busy for the last 2 weeks. That's no good to me,
And did you ever see members coming in off the back of the events? Did it benefit the space much?
Yeah, of course. The bigger events were brilliant, right? And especially the aligned events, as you said there. So one particularly fruitful and good event was the local chamber in Galway. They'll move around from, various offices, and member companies put their offices up for, kind of, I suppose it's a way for them to promote their business, but also share their space with the wider business community in Galway. And they get a slot to talk about their business at the start of the event. So one of the more fruitful ones were exactly that. It was great fun because a lot of chamber-based businesses or chamber member businesses, a lot of they would be more traditional, suit and tie type of operations. We were in the co-working space. We ran it in true co-working style. It was the kind of space that we had, I suppose, which was focused on startups and freelancers and all that. It was a little less polished than we'd expect in a course. So everybody was like I did my best. We had, wine glasses and all that kind of stuff shipped in, but we ran out fairly quickly because it was oversubscribed. So the next thing you had, how would I say, men in suits drinking wine out of red cups, and I was kind of half embarrassed, but it turned out they all thought it was great crack. They felt like they all
You're
were like, oh,
probably bringing
it's
them
like
back to another time.
exactly. It was said to me, I feel like I'm back in college, which is brilliant. But again, it was more aligned with the co-working space and the vibe that we were creating anyway. It got great feedback. The event, everybody really enjoyed it. At the top of the event, I got to say, this is what we do. Please think about us when you're talking to, new companies that you might be working with and people that are, clients of yours. So again, we created a word of mouth kind of thing. So like that, off the back of that, I had people coming up the stairs, and me, I'm very big on, oh, how'd you hear about us? And that was one of the bigger ones. I've said it in the past, like if you are hosting events, be sure to take that couple of minutes at the top of the event to introduce yourself, introduce your space, your offerings, and I suppose, encourage them to reach out on LinkedIn, check out your website, whatever the call to action may be. And
let them know how to interact, what to do next.
You should never assume that everybody in the room knows what the space does, even if they're in there,
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we've definitely heard. And it sounds so obvious, but when you're in the flurry and trying to make sure that everything is going well and the projector is on and the refreshments arrived, it's easy to let those things slide a little bit, but actually they're the most important bits of the event. I think boundaries are important in any business, and knowing like what works and what doesn't work. And I think it's especially true in co-working spaces because kind of the vibe and the brand can kind of take so many different steers based on who comes through the door. So like knowing what type of event is aligned and not saying yes to everything, because as you mentioned, a lot of people can come and want kind of access to your space and your time. Like what's a good way for operators to know that an event is aligned, and what are the signs that you'd look out for that it's not delivering enough value for you to put on?
The events that you're running don't necessarily need to be aligned with what your co-workers do in their professional domain. It could also be stuff that they like to do outside of that. I mean, I ran a fashion show one time. I mean, and like the co-working space we had nothing to do with fashion. There was a collective of, again, Galway being such a creative city full of, creative people and everything else. There was a collective of fashion designers. They had a co-op going on, and they wanted to know if we could do a fashion show. And it was a tiny space. But in fairness, they did a great job in getting an attendance to come. And what happened was we ended up with a lot of well-known content creators and bloggers and all that kind of good stuff. So, even though these people weren't aligned with startups and freelancing and all that kind of good stuff, or the stuff that you would imagine, like that tech-based kind of thing, all of a sudden they were on sharing this event from the space. And that in itself was appealing to their wider audience. And that in a sense then did draw people. So absolutely not aligned with what the co-working space was set up to do. But because we were willing to, make it accessible to the wider community beyond the professional domains, had a great local brand building
it sounds like that had like a big element of ownership from the people within the space, and that kind of lends itself then to like culture and maybe longer term members, or like a community vibe within the space, and also like the context of the space in the wider community geographically, right? Like what do you feel kind of drove that level of ownership or input from the members? Because of course, if operators have members approaching them and saying, hey, can we do this thing? I think, it probably goes for the operators here in the space we're in, like they'd be so happy to see you take something and run with it, Yeah. Is that something that operators can kind of facilitate or foster a bit, or does it just evolve naturally?
I think you can facilitate it to an extent, and then success breeds success. So if you have a couple of working examples, as I kind of allowed people ask if they could have events and stuff like that. If someone comes in the door then and they ask, oh, could I have an event? Yeah, absolutely. We've done this before. I had guys that organised a meetup about Trello 5 years ago, which was up, and they were all about efficiencies, and they were in SME them, like, and they built apps and all of that kind of stuff. So they wanted to share all the good automation and processes that they were after building into their, a small team of 5 or 6 people. They were looking to find other small businesses that they served. So that made loads of sense. So they were providing value without necessarily making it a quid pro quo.
I love that. So like niching down maybe, and maybe not having criteria like no event is too small kind of a vibe. If a flex space, co-working space has multiple, different areas within the building even, Maybe it's about getting creative, that like an event doesn't have to mean your full event space, refreshments, the whole 9 yards, promotion. Maybe it's actually taking a smaller space and having a almost like a meetup.
Great point.
Could be counted as part of your events calendar as well.
Because in the space we had, there was this wall, there's a glass wall, and it would fold back so I could open up the space on a bigger day because all our furniture was modular. This is the other thing, it doesn't always have to be in the evening either. Events don't always have to be in the evening. You touched on a good point there. So I'd often close off the wall, and again, you would make sure that they knew it wasn't going to be soundproof. It was an intimate setting, few couches, a big enough TV to do a presentation, and again, you could check that off as an event. My stakeholders and bosses could see Graham's running events there, and again, it was within the 9 to 5, which meant I didn't have to stay back after work, you know.
I haven't met too many operators who say they don't see the value in events. I think pretty much everybody does, but it's the life cycle of having to run one. It's the planning, it's the lead up. How do you get people in the room? Nobody wants nobody to come to their party. And if you're not like a naturally extroverted person, I think most operators are, if you're not naturally in a space where you can rev your energy up to like keep this calendar of events stacked, maybe bringing your members in on what's running, even ideas for topics if they haven't got the bandwidth themselves, but like promoting it. I loved the tip we heard from an operator recently where when she's got an event scheduled, she sends it out and she says, can you share this with 10 people in your network? Thought it was a great idea. It's like give people, rather than saying, hey, will you spread the word, saying send this to 10 people. People like clear direction. And even if they don't attend themselves, they might get one or two faces coming into the space, new or old. Even if it's somebody who's returning, that's still beneficial too, right?
But then, Anne-Marie, if 10 people are sending it to 10 people, right, and they never come to the event, they've still heard about your space.
100%. 100%. And it's a place people will always log like, oh, there's stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And like all marketing, you need 7 to 10 touch points before people take an action. So, you know, whether they actually attend your event or not, don't take it personally. There's always benefit in momentum and people seeing that a space is active, and they might see or receive a link to 5 or 6 of your events and then they'll actually go to the 7th, you know. It is consistently, I have to say, consistently. It's the thing that when we speak to operators and we say, how do you get new people through the door? People say events. Like the feedback we had, she had heard directly from somebody who came in on a 1-day pass that they had initially met the space or kind of come in through the door first to an event. And the reason they waited for an event was because they said the space was on their radar, but they said, you know, when there's like a pub that you'd like to try out, but none of your friends go there, and you can't walk in on your own. So an event happened. She was okay to go to the event on her own, and then she booked into the space off the back of that because she felt a bit more comfortable, knew the running and was okay. Because I guess your work day isn't something you're going to kind of hang in the balance. If you've got a couple of calls to do and you need things to go well, you're just going to stay in a place that's a safe bet. So actually getting to literally walk around and see the setup and know that the facilities are there, that you can do a good day's work and be comfortable there, it's important. So yeah, maybe it's also like running the event and giving people the opportunity to have a little wander around the space and all that good stuff as well while they're there, you know, pick up on the vibe and things.
As an operator, if that person was to actually come in and look for a tour, that's 15-20 minutes of the operator's time. Whereas at least with an event, as you said, they can walk around, have a look. So you're serving many in one event in a number of hours. It's like an open house for if you're selling a gaff, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And if you've got members and their chances are they're going to stop at the coffee machine and have a bit of a chat with whoever's walking around. They're aware that the floor is open. They'll probably interact a little bit more when it's event rather than a random tour. I kind of keep the head down when I know a tour is on, you know what I mean? Because you're not going to be smiling and nodding at everybody like, you know, coming through the door. In terms then of managing the admin around an event, do you think people are aware, operators are aware of how to run it seamlessly so that it takes the friction out of it and the pain out of it for themselves? Or do you think people are still hand cranking? Like, what's available for them to be using?
There's a limitless amount of event running softwares on the web. Like you can go on and you can like literally there'll be pages and pages of them. You have the larger operators like Eventbrite, Meetup, all of these kind of things, and they're great. They're great for sure. So I think definitely, and obviously we have our own event system in BaseWorks fully kitted out. But you are going to need something to push tickets, collect numbers, get names, all that kind of stuff.
Already add them to your CRM once they book their entry.
Yeah.
Free or paid tickets.
Exactly. You can do all of that. And look, even with us, like we realized that a lot of spaces that use our software may not necessarily want to use our events module because they have, again, a lot of the time what you're competing with is status quo. Like I love what your software does, but actually do this for events and this works quite well. So we have the ability to actually create redirects to those from our software as well. So if you do land on a BaseWorks event, it'll be a book now button and it will drive you off to whatever event booking system that you have. But come back to the original point, I suppose, have something that will collect the information, whether that's Eventbrite or our own software or something like that. Have your attendees list. You absolutely need to check off the names, print off the attendee list, check off the names who's attended, so that within you can, every event manager or community manager or operator, you have 10 signups, you need to know how many are going to come. You need to have that gauge, like that you have a 60-70% attendance rate, because we all do it. We all sign up for things with the best intentions to turn up, but as an operator, it's key for you to understand, if you have 100 people signed up, how many are actually going to come, because that all pushes back onto budget. And that all affects the catering bill. It all affects all the things attached to the costs and the things, how many pod tables you might have to rent out, the time you spend setting up the room, how many chairs do we need. So you need those metrics. Getting the bookings is one thing. Making sure then that you're measuring how many people have come is another. Managing your budget and making sure there's enough grub and everything else there for them. And then you have to do the post-event analysis. You have to, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What could we have got better? And some operators are very good at sending out feedback forms, or actually printing off feedback forms and having people thank them again at the tail end of the event, thank them for attending the event, give us a little feedback if you wouldn't mind. It's all anonymous, and then you spend some time going through that. And all you're doing there is educating yourself to run more effective, more efficient, and more cost-friendly events. So then what you can do is you can start honing in on which ones are actually giving you somewhat of a return on investment. And it's just, look, it's all simple in theory, but in practice, you just have to put those good habits in place for when you run an event,
You're kind of, I suppose, putting up some guardrails around your own time and energy as well, because it may feel a little bit cumbersome to put events or systems in place around events to begin with. But once you've done that and you can kind of set your watch by it a little bit, it actually slots nicely into a strategy around kind of mapping out traffic into your space across the year and through all the different seasons of the business. Because if you know a particular type of event does very well, you're not going to plot it into your calendar for a time when you know that the kind of profile for that group isn't around or won't attend. You know what I mean? So you're kind of your winners, if you like, every time we put on that type of event or we partner with that speaker that always does really well. So let's put it here in the calendar, So having visibility and really understanding what events are doing from a commercial perspective for the space and how they're lending themselves to your bottom line, basically, and how they're helping to drive new members in through the door is a really big part of things,
The vast majority of spaces are under-resourced when it comes to the human element. We're all trying to do so much with small teams. So it's vital that you make the most of your time, lean on the community where you can. But as you said there, make sure that if an event works and you have it tight and it's going to generate so many people in the door, absolutely bed that in and roll it out and keep it going.
Yeah, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can literally save that as an event format, you know what I mean, and republish it. And what strikes me about it as well is partnership. So collaboration and partnership. Are there businesses in the area that benefit or that want to speak to the same audience as you? Can you bring them in? Is there a bit of budget that they're willing to share? Do you have some kind of hero of events in your calendar and then smaller events around it? Just plan it ahead of time and give yourself, you're not kind of trying to think on the fly then, gosh, it's been a few weeks since we had an event, we should have another one,
Yeah, one thing I will say though is it's okay to fail with an event. Been there myself, where it just didn't work. Might get caught with the West of Ireland weather and people aren't leaving their houses on a certain evening and you're sitting there with, platters of sandwiches and nobody's there. I think every community manager that's run an event has probably done it. You're looking to get the few people that you have in the room tucked into a corner to have that shot for the socials that makes it look as if it was a success.
Yeah.
When that happens, suck it up and learn from it, really. It shouldn't be a reason to kind of lose faith in the event.
At the risk of sounding toxically positive, I would still follow the process. I would still do your follow-up because you don't know that one of the people in that room isn't going to be a speaker for another event or isn't going to send it out to 3 members who come through the door at a later time. You know what I mean? You just have to ride the waves. That's every business has that happen.
But there's another one. Then I remember one event we ran. We were chatting with documentaries. And, did you see this documentary? I was chatting with one of the members. The same member had a book club. So I said for the Clarke, I said, wouldn't we have a documentary club for the banter? Really cheap event to run. Got a few, bags of popcorn, a couple of beers. The great thing is we all watched it together. So It's not like book clubs where I actually didn't read the book, but I'm here anyway. Everybody had read the book, right? And it was a
Yeah.
good, and the great thing about Galway again was that we were surrounded by filmmakers and people that actually made documentaries. So I just
Cool.
sat back and let other people host it. No, it was a great event, well subscribed, but to be honest, a lot of these people wouldn't come into the co-working space. So
After
it
all
was a,
that, don't do it.
yeah, don't do it.
Well, to
I'm
be
just saying,
fair,
yeah, I'm just thinking, like, what I'm trying to say is, like, there could be a position where you have a successful event that actually does nothing for your space.
well, I suppose you don't know it does nothing for your
Fair
space
point.
because,
Yeah,
if there was 10 people in the room, they probably went out and told 10 people that they watched the documentary and put it on somebody's radar. Like, I do think there's something, again, a business is a business. Like, any news is good news. So
fair
I'd
enough.
rather you ran the event and had somebody talking about the space, and maybe in 2 years' time somebody
Mm,
comes through the door. You just
mm,
don't know. But like,
yeah,
I don't think sitting around with an empty calendar because you're worried about the right type of
yeah.
event is the right way. I think the point you made earlier is bang on, which is like, try it.
Mm,
Try it.
mm.
Run something, see if it works, and go for it. Like, it can hurt. And I do think sometimes the networking, the kind of tech support, deep dive sessions, and then sometimes something lighter that's like interesting to people outside of their work, unless they're actually documentary makers and it literally is their job. But
But
yeah,
then speaking to space operators and all of that, one thing I would say to them is being the center of these events, and I'm talking from a professional perspective. You may not always work in the co-working space that you're working in, so you may decide not to stay in the industry. These events are a great way for you to build your own personal and professional profile as well.
yeah.
So keep that in mind that, like, obviously you're in doing what you're doing under your own employer's hat, but we all need to be thinking about our own career paths and everything else. So no, they are great for a personal profile as well.
Absolutely. And it's like it's no harm to kind of elevate other people alongside you and then also recognize the value that you're bringing too.
Yeah.
Because people really, from what I can see, I think operators are amazing, honestly. Like, they do so many jobs. They're thinking in the day to day on a deep level, trying to really understand the running of the business on a day to day. The day you're living, you've probably planned 6 months ago. I mean, the operators here are probably thinking, what's the summer going to look like in our space? Now they're on to what's Christmas going to look like, the future planning of the business. And
I
then
was in
they're active
lunch.
in the moment as well, like
Yeah,
hosting these
yeah.
things and everything. Yeah. I think it's fantastic to be kind of tapped into the real interest of your members as well. And that is a great way to get new people into the space as well. There can also be pure gold when you go slightly outside the rails of kind of typical business stuff and corporate stuff. A lot of co-working spaces have people in who are kind of entrepreneurial and are working across different spaces. So an event that's inclusive and kind of taps into their interests, like a bit of knowledge sharing, really.
Yeah.
Like, that's always good if you're looking for one to plug into the calendar. I think, we do lunch and learn kind of vibe here. And it is interesting, sometimes we'd be joking about who's going to stand up on the soapbox this week, like, and do their talk. But you do actually always learn something. You always come
Do.
away with something you weren't aware. And I'd be like, Jesus, your man's been sitting behind me for 6 months. I had no idea, like, that he was into that.
That-
In terms of, I suppose, measuring the results of events, like, it's all well and good to have the crack and all that good stuff. And, I suppose we're sharing to kind of drive on and have the events no matter what and just pay attention to what's working and not working. Are there any specific metrics that you think people should look at to judge whether it's worth repeating? Because, like, it could be the case that somebody doesn't come back to your space straight away. So, like, if you've run something, what would you have judged it on when you were running a space?
Look, the easy ones are attendance, right? I think budget is another metric you'd want to watch, like your annual budget for the year.
And your return based on your spend. I'm thinking about some ways of kind of orchestrating immediate action, so we can get creative around these things, and give some people something that appeals to them. So, like, if you know that a hot desk might be interesting, or if at the event you learned that maybe having access to just a meeting room for calls, like 3 times a week, but they don't even need the hot desk. They just need to come in and use the meeting room. Maybe they're given kind of 3 passes for meeting rooms to use in the next 30 days. There are things that you could do to put something time bound on your event as well to drive some kind of immediate conversion through from it so that you can report.
You will always have the people that will never work in your co-working space but love to turn up for free beer and pizza for every event.
Listen, they fill the photograph.
This
They're all
yeah.
welcome.
Because you're getting value at some point, I suppose.
They're
Yeah.
getting value at some point, and you don't know that they didn't go in and say, I just had the best beer and pizza down the road.
Exactly.
Where was that co-working space? Oh, cool, I'll book in. It's
Fair
still a
point.
conversation about your space. Yeah,
Spot on.
100%. Okay, anything else that operators need to have in mind about events, Graham?
If we're to recap it, is have faith even when you don't have a successful event. There's always value in learning. Have a system in place where you can clock your attendances, book, I suppose sign-ups versus attendance. Not every event needs to be big production type of stuff. You can have
Keep it
small
simple.
gatherings and get-togethers. Don't be afraid to go outside the box or outside the alignment of what your co-working space is about. Yeah, I think always do the review. Always see what you could do better. I think that would be my... Did I miss anything
Joe, one thing I'll add that strikes me, it's easy sometimes to think, oh, I did my promotion and then I'll see who turns up on the night. Please make people sign up in advance, because you will have a drop off. And if you have a 10% drop off and you're waiting for people to walk through the door and put their name on a sheet at the front door, you're going to lose a lot of people who were interested but never told you. It's okay to use your social channels to say, hey, we're thinking about running this type of event. Would you come? Pop your email in here if you would come, or even tick yes. You can run a poll on LinkedIn and get people to say, yes, I'd be interested in that type of event. Like, trial your ideas to gauge the interest, and whether people ever walk through the door or not, then they're watching. Because people watch, then they have a little bit of interaction, then they actually walk through the door. They're on a journey themselves. So getting to know your space, people probably won't discover your space and put an evening aside to go to an event. It'll probably be a bit of a journey. So introducing those ways to let them interact with your business can be a helpful way to gauge kind of traffic and interest. And that's a nice one to be able to tell your stakeholders too. You can share, look, we're thinking about launching these documentary evenings. We ran it on socials. We think we'd have a good catchment. We're going to go ahead with it,
The out and out for profits may be a bit more standoffish, but may demand a return on investment from their events. But we more and more we speak with co-working spaces. A lot of them are out there for social intent, socially focused, not for profits. They can be more open to their having more diverse event schedule.
Absolutely. Listen, you've paid tickets. If you want to get a return on your events, you run paid tickets. Nothing wrong with that. Can be a fiver that's donated to charity after the fact, but getting people to commit in some small way to your space, then who's serious about coming through the door. So I think any event, it's making sure that it fits the model, the revenue model and the culture of your space. And it's by design. There's great freedom in co-working spaces. Spaces are all different shapes, sizes, locations, they're all operating for different reasons and different types of members. So I'm glad to say we have tech that can kind of, work around the requirements of your space, but there are some kind of core steps I think to have in place if you want to make your own life easier and enable yourself to have a bit of a system around it so you can run more of it, more of those types of events.
That's the thing. Once you build momentum and you have an audience that you can, you came to this event the last time, there's another event. So you'll end up building a base. So you are going to, you have to, I suppose, at the start, you are going to be starting from a low base.
Be ready for that. Yeah. And the other thing is, you don't know where they'll go. You're going to get people in a room and it's not actually down to you where it goes, because people will connect. Next thing you'll hear about partnerships coming out of it, or founders meeting and all this type of thing. So you're kind of, you're bringing people together. Wonderful. All right, Graham, thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Flex That Worx. You can check it out everywhere where you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to hear your take. So if you see this shared on social media, we're active on LinkedIn, and you can comment under the episode wherever you'd listened. So we'd love to hear any of your tips as well for other operators around events and how they work in your space. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Emery.
Thanks for tuning in to Flex That Worx. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. Connect with us on LinkedIn, watch the full episode on YouTube, and you can explore free tools and resources over at baseworks.co. This is Flex That Worx, powered by Baseworks, here to help you scale your workspace, making it simpler and less stressful.